Rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign in a coming federal election, most likely within the next 120 days, and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
In Bermuda, and the $5 billion catalytic transition fund where he registered it in the Cayman Islands. Do I have that right?
Hang on, Mr. Cooper. Point of order, Ms. Church, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if we can ask yourself as the chair to please illuminate how this line of questioning is relevant to the study of this committee, which pertains to a review of the Conflict of Interest Act.
Gang, what's up? Aaron here, Kennedy and Looney. We're going back to committee. This is ethics investigations, and they're trying to find out, like, does Mark Carney have a single ethic? We've got our man Michael Cooper, backed up by Michael Barrett, attacked by MP Leslie Church, who is covering up for the boss. She's a liar. You can just tell she's a phony person. Let's get into this. These committee investigations are always interesting. The Liberals are shameless. Once you have the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't get it back in. Once you see these Liberals in action, you cannot forget it. They are trying to destroy our culture, covering up for our lame Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Let's take a peek.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
You are next from the Conservative Party. 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Ward, Brookfield owns substantial investments in Canada and is the largest owner of commercial properties in major cities across Canada, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that Brookfield has reaped very large profits from its investments in Canada?
That would be correct, although
okay, and while Brookfield has reaped large profits in Canada, it has paid relatively little in the way of Canadian taxes, correct?
Correct.
And help me understand how Brookfield avoids paying taxes in Canada. As I understand it, Brookfield sets up a complex web of foreign subsidiaries in which investment funds ultimately end up in Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and other tax havens, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that's precisely what Mark Carney did when he was the chair of Brookfield, when he set up the $10 billion or $15 billion Global Transition Fund. He registered it in Bermuda. The $10 billion second Global Transition Fund, he registered it in Bermuda. And the $5 billion catalytic transition fund where he registered it in the Cayman Islands. Do I have that right?
Hang on, Mr. Cooper. Point of order, Ms. Church, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering if we can ask yourself as the chair to please illuminate how this line of questioning is relevant to the study of this committee, which pertains to a review of the Conflict of Interest Act, and not about either the tax dealings of any particular individual or of tax law, frankly, generally.
Okay, so, I've been chairing this committee for almost 3 years now. I generally give a lot of latitude, as we do in the House, for members of the committee to use their time. And I do expect Mr. Cooper, as a seasoned member of this committee, that he will come back and bring this back to where it needs to go, and I would give as much latitude to you, Ms. Church, as I'm giving to Mr. Barrett or Mr. Cooper right now. On the same point of order, Mr. Barrett, I've stopped the time too, by the way. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett. I don't want to engage in debate on this.
No, but it was about whether this pertains to the motion. I'm not sure, Chair, if perhaps you could read the motion or have Ms. Church read the motion back into the record. Tax havens is specifically spelled out. Carried interest payments, this is very relevant to the application of the Conflict of Interest Act. And so it's the line of questioning it's very clear to see where it's leading, but it also speaks directly to the motion. So I appreciate your ruling with respect to latitude, but I don't think respectfully that any latitude is required. Mr. Cooper is engaged in a line of questioning that goes to the heart of the matter that we're studying, and that's why we have this expert.
I appreciate that intervention, Mr. Barrett. I'm not going to reread the motion. I think all the members are clear of where this is going. We are studying the Conflict of Interest Act as it relates to designated public office holders, and perhaps the recommendations will come in the response. Recommendations of the committee and the report will come from some of the responses that Mr. Ward gives to Mr. Cooper's questions. Mr. Cooper, you have 3 minutes and 49 seconds to continue your questioning. Go ahead.
So to the witness, did I get that right with respect to Mark Carney setting up 3 major multi-billion-dollar clean energy funds from Brookfield in tax havens, including Bermuda and the Cayman Islands?
I can't speak to the specifics of those particular funds,
Okay,
but it would seem par for the course.
Okay, thank you very much. On page 12 of your report, there is reference to Brookfield's tax gap over the last 5 years between 2017 and 2021. Just so that I'm clear on what a tax gap means, it is measuring the difference between taxes actually paid and taxes that would have been paid if the statutory Canadian tax rate had been applied to profits reaped. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And according to your analysis, or the analysis cited in your report, Brookfield's tax gap in just 5 years between 2017 to 2021 was over $6.5 billion. Is that right?
That's correct, and that was based on research done by the Canadians for Tax Fairness and by some analysis from the Toronto Star as well.
So it would be fair to say that the extent of Brookfield's tax avoidance, taxes that it should have otherwise paid in Canada in just 5 years, was over $6.5 billion.
Yes, I mean, the tax gap is looking at the statutory rate, and there are some reasons why legitimate reasons why companies pay below that, but that's an indication of a major underpayment of taxes that, in the spirit of the law, should have been paid in Canada to finance public services in Canada.
Yeah, I'd say $6.5 billion is a lot of money. Would it be fair to say that Brookfield is Canada's largest tax dodger amongst corporations?
It has been labeled as such, and if it's not the largest, it's clearly in the very top tier.
Well, your report cites 123 of Canada's largest corporations, and it found that the largest tax gap for 2017 to 21 was none other than Brookfield, right?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You still have a minute, Mr. Cooper. If you are,
Okay, well, I would just ask the witness if he can just elaborate on why it is in his submissions that a blind trust is not an appropriate mechanism.
in 45 seconds, sir.
Well, I think because there's still the ability to profit from something in a blind trust, even if you don't know the details of what's going on, you're benefiting from the actions that might be taken by somebody else on your behalf.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Church from the Liberal Party for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Church.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ward, so you started off your remarks by saying that you're not an expert on Canada's Conflict of Interest Act. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you know who is covered by Canada's Conflict of Interest Act?
I'm assuming that it relates to public officials, but I have not read the act. I am an expert on tax havens and other using various schemes to avoid tax.
So you would agree then that it doesn't cover corporations, that it's not the intent of the act? The intent of the act is to cover public office holders?
I do not have the knowledge to respond to that adequately.
Well, let's talk about blind trusts then, if you're not familiar with the act itself. Are you aware that investments that are entered into a blind trust are fully disclosed before they're put into a blind trust by a public office holder?
That the investments are disclosed before entering into a blind trust?
Correct.
Yes.
So those, just for the sake of transparency, those assets then are known. The public office holder then puts them into a blind trust so that from that point forward, they no longer have control over those assets. Correct?
Right.
That's right. So a public office holder then would have no awareness over the performance or even the composition of the assets that were in a blind trust once that trust is established. Correct?
Yes, but they would benefit from actions taken by others on their behalf in profits that might be derived
Now,
into that.
how
from
would
the
they
blind
know
trust.
that if they didn't know what the composition of the blind trust was?
Well, I think there's an example here that is very relevant south of Canada with the situation of the Trump administration profiting from deals that are being constructed by his children. That's not a blind trust situation.
But you
and
understand the actual responsibilities of the trustee of a blind trust, which is that they have the authority, fiduciary authority over the trust and the assets in that trust to make changes to it, to sell those assets, that a person who establishes a trust actually is prevented under Canadian conflict of interest legislation from providing direction to the trustee. So the public office holder who establishes the trust actually does not have control, has not provided any guidance to the trustee, and has no awareness as to the composition of that trust following its establishment. You're aware of that in the Canadian context?
I am aware of that in the Canadian context. However, if you look at the case of big four accounting firms who also have created legal situations where information is not supposed to transfer from one part of the business to another, it has. And so I do
Mr. Ward,
think
what
that
relevance does that have to the Canadian Conflict of Interest Act that covers public office holders in the Canadian Parliament?
it's a parallel situation in which rules that exist are abused because there's information.
Is there an
transferred
ethics
between
commissioner
trustees.
that is governing private sector blind trusts or whatever situation it is you're talking about in big accounting firms? Is there a publicly funded, determined ethics commissioner in office responsible for oversight in those cases?
In some jurisdictions, yes.
In Canada?
I'm not familiar with the Canadian law.
No, there is not. There is no public ethics commissioner that oversees those. That is a role of Parliament. When a public officer has a blind trust, is that public office holder shielded from tax for any gains or losses that may be incurred of the assets in that trust?
Well, it depends on how the investments in the blind trust are structured, doesn't it?
Well, I think the answer there is no, that tax law actually applies to the assets that are controlled by a blind trust, and it is the fiduciary, the trustee in this case, that is actually responsible for the tax management of those assets. Is that not correct?
There are huge amounts of loopholes, which you've just been discussing, that are in the tax law that allow individuals and corporations to significantly reduce their tax obligations under legal provisions in the law that we've just been discussing.
Now,
are
Mr. Ward,
clearly,
I'm
in my
sure that
view,
you can help me
immoral.
distinguish between what is general tax law or international tax law and what I'm asking you, which is for an individual that has assets in a blind trust, those assets are subject to tax law, yes or no?
Of course, they're subject
Of course
to tax
they
law,
are
but-
subject to tax law.
But is the tax law an effective mechanism in order for them to pay the appropriate amount of tax?
But Mr. Ward, I don't want to seem too disagreeable with you, but I guess I'm trying to draw a distinction between the case of an individual public office holder, a parliamentarian who puts their assets in a blind
Ms.
trust
Church,
for the purpose
I'm
of
going to have to get you to wrap up.
okay
Quick question.
for the purposes of being able to represent public office, different from any concerns that an individual like yourself may have about tax law generally, which we can all as parliamentarians accept is worthy of debate, but is a completely separate situation from what we're talking about here.
We're 40 seconds over. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to respond, Mr. Ward, please.
I think there's a moral obligation to show leadership in avoiding conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest and being clear.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you, Ms. Church. We were a minute over.
Wrap it up right there, gang. Aaron, Canadian Looney, Michael Cooper, Michael Barrett. What a great team. John Broussard is one of the best chairs, one of my favorites, top 3 anyways. Kelly McCauley and John Williamson are also great. Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe. We present all these committee meetings. We do a live show on question period with a great pre-show showing what goes on before question period happens. That's it. Come and join us. We've got the best chat room online. You can come and verify that for yourself. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Get your Canadian federal politics right here.